Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Tonight is Comprehensivist Wednesday. So this is done in conjunction with the Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society. We have a very special evening. We have my good friend Evanique and Mike. This is Improv Wednesdays. We've been doing these over the past few months. They've been hugely successful and everybody's really had a great time. And tonight, Evanique and Mike will be talking about the importance of listening. So I'm going to spotlight Evanique and Mike. They're going to have a conversation, and then we'll actually move to a Q&A and a general discussion. And then we're going to actually do some improv exercises that I think are going to be a lot of fun for everyone. So with that, I will actually now go ahead and spotlight Evanique and Mike. And then once I'll let you both know. And Mike.
Yay.
Okay. And you're good to go.
All right. Thank you, Joe, and welcome everybody. I'm really looking forward to this conversation with my good friend Evanique. And of course, she and I are going to tackle the entire realm of listening in like a half hour. So that's going to be a snap. What's happened here is over the last several months is we picked a topic that was germane to improvisation. So obviously listening is a skill that you have to have there. And what we've done is I picked somebody to kind of chat with me. So we do this sort of in podcast format. So Evanique and I are just going to open and talk about listening from our perspective. And we're hoping that when that conversation is done, all of you who are listening are going to be eager to kind of jump aboard the conversation. It turns out this 52 Living Ideas community is a community of people that have these wonderful hacks for solving problems. Like I personally have difficulty listening in certain areas. And I don't know about Evanique yet. We're going to find out what her perspective is. But it turns out that when I presented a problem in the past here, somebody in the audience has come up with a hack that was able to help me lead into a better direction. So we're going to talk for about a half hour. Then we'll open it up to a general discussion. And then we'll do the improv exercises, as Joe mentioned. Those will not be recorded. So if any of you have not done any improv or character development in the past, do not worry. Okay, so Evanique, thank you so much for having this conversation with me.
You're welcome. I'm happy that you asked. I'm so excited.
You know, I thought a good place to start would be, because it was actually Becky who recommended or thought that you would be a great participant here. And then I called you, and then we didn't quite have a topic yet. And you said without any prompting, how about something along the lines of listening? So that must have been on the tip of your tongue. So I'm just curious, like, what made that come out so quickly?
You know what's so funny is that I think like maybe a couple days beforehand, or maybe it was within the same week, I had told you the story that I was on the phone with a coworker, and I was, the coworker was talking, and I had absolutely no idea what this person said, had no idea what was being asked. And at the end of this conversation, he stopped, and it took me like a minute to realize that he stopped. And I was like, all I could do was apologize to him and say, I am so sorry. I was working on an email. I was thinking somewhere else. Like I wasn't there. I wasn't present. And I was like, oh my goodness, I didn't hear a word you said. I apologize. And so when I had to apologize to this person, I was so embarrassed. And then I was like, how often is it that I don't listen? And first of all, I felt so rude. Like I felt like I was so rude. And this person was talking to me. This person was trying to get something from me. And I just totally did not hear them. Now, lucky for me, this person, it was a really good coworker of mine and knew me and knew my work. So they weren't, offended at all. They said they understand it happens, and they repeated what they had to say. But I was just like, how many people do I do that to? So that's what
Yeah.
made me. So that's what made me want to explore this topic.
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. Let me ask you this. When you went through the emails prior to that conversation, did any of them make you emotional? Like, were you amped up when that person was talking to you? Because that's an issue that I have that I'll share later.
You know what was so funny? I think I was I work for the legal department of a healthcare company, and I was handling, some litigation documents. And I think I was just ramped up about that because they were all coming in at the same time. And I was just like, I got to get it done. I got to get it all done.
Right.
And I didn't stop, and I didn't get present. And I think that's what happened. So you're right. There was some emotion there because I was like, I got to get it done. All has to get done. And in my head, I had created it all needs to get done right now.
Right. So you have that in the background as this person is talking to you, and that's why those words just go right over your head.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I know for me that, again, from improv, I was telling Maxine earlier, I took an improv class tonight, and I was fortunate enough to get onto one of their troops that's really above my head. It's a stretch for me. It doesn't mean that I don't like the challenge of being there, but they are more experienced improvisers, right? So even in the class tonight, this is only a couple of hours ago, that we're given instruction to work on something, yet the fact that I have that little bit of fear, a little bit of anxiety, because what's coming down the road for me is new, that fear for me acts like a blocker. It makes it harder to listen because you have this amped up feeling, and the words for me don't go in smoothly. Do you know what I mean? And then when it comes time for me to perform in the scene or something, I'm still not 100% sure what I heard from my scene partner. However, by the end of the class, because a couple of things went around that were funny, that were really, really funny, they hit the mark. And for me, humor does the complete opposite for my listening skill than fear. So if I'm in public and I can get somebody to laugh, there's like an instant engagement that happens. How about you? Does your mood affect the way you listen, or any experience with that?
Yes, I definitely think the mood does have an effect because I'll go back to that phone call. To me, before I even knew who that person was, as soon as I heard my phone ringing, I'm like, oh God, something else. Here we go. Or it could be that I wake up and I'm just not in the mood to talk to anybody. And then that'll be the exact moment that someone calls. And I'll be like, first I'm looking at the phone like, do I really want to deal with this person? And then I finally pick up, and then I'm like, I halfway really don't want to deal with this person. And it would almost be better if I had not picked up the phone and gotten present for a few minutes, because you're right, the mood does fit. For me, it's more of like annoyance, like when I want to be by myself and just kind of get myself together, and then the phone rings and it's like an interruption to that.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of just letting it ring, for some reason, I feel this compulsion to pick it up. And then when I pick it up, I'm like, I'm not even present with this
Yes.
person.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, definitely that has an effect on me.
Yeah.
And I get the fear thing too, because when I'm nervous, I'm in my head, like I'm completely in my head, and I am thinking of 50 million things that could go wrong in this conversation before the person says
Of course.
hello.
Yeah.
So
And
I totally
especially,
get that.
yeah, and especially if there's a bit of anger there. This happens all the time when people are arguing. And if you're arguing about something, I'm talking about in the right way, where there's just a disagreement, right? We're not really angry at each other, but we do disagree. And I've heard many times that they say, before you give your opinion back, you should try to repeat back to what the person said to you. So in improv, it would be your scene partner. But if you and I were disagreeing about something, instead of me immediately giving you my side of the story, a good habit is to try to stop and then see if I can repeat what it is, the point that you just made. if I can do that, because if I can do that, then I'm really listening. And if you're really listening, you could say back to me, no, that's not what I said at all. And then we can both kind of re-up our stance to get to the point where I truly understood what you said, but what happens a lot is that we get amped up and get emotional, and I just can't wait for you to stop talking, right? I just can't wait for you to stop talking so that I can immediately throw my opinion out. And that happens in improv sometimes too, because I'm an amateur improviser. I'm not a pro. I don't get paid to do this. So there are times when I'm uncomfortable on stage. And if I'm improvising with another amateur, which I usually am, if we're both a little uneasy, then sometimes we're not kind of in the scene together. It's almost like it's two separate scenes that are taking place. But the really good listeners get themselves to the point where they know exactly what their scene partner just said. Does that make sense? It's like you said it, I heard it, and you created a reality that I'm going to follow through in the next scene. So this is from the improv standpoint, right? What happens is, in improv anyway, if I'm not listening carefully to you, you could say something in front of the audience that I don't hear. You may say who you are, or some aspect about your life that the audience heard. And if I don't hear it as your scene partner, then it's very easy for me to continue that scene, creating a different reality. And every now and then somebody in the audience will say, hey, wait a minute, time out. She just said, you're from wherever. And if I don't hear that and I say something back, that's not always so good. So are you a musician by any chance? I didn't know that about you. Have you
No,
played
I'm not
any music?
a musician. Nope.
Any singing, any choir, any
Singing, yes, but not good. No one would want to hear that. But I will sing out to my favorite song.
Okay.
So, but no, professionally, no, I'm not a musician.
Yeah.
I was in theater, but I was more background. But
Okay.
But to go back to what you were saying, and what you were describing in the beginning, where you kind of like repeat back what the person said.
Yes.
It's called I've heard it called reflective listening.
Mm-hmm.
And what it did, it's a very hard. It's not a hard skill, but it's a skill that needs practice. And it really is not just saying what the person said back to you, like repeating it word for word. It's more getting the understanding of what the person is saying. I think that, and really understanding where they're coming from. When in the beginning example, you used an argument, like,
Mm-hmm.
and how you're waiting to just say something because you're concentrating on being right. Like, you're right about this. You knew when you came into the argument that you were right about this. So of course you're just waiting for me to shut up so that you can just get your point across, right?
Indeed. Yes.
So, but then you're not really paying attention to what I said. And that's, I think, where a lot of disagreements turn into full blown out fights, I think, because you're talking, I'm not really hearing you. You're not really hearing me. I know I'm right. You know you're right. And we're just waiting for the other person to shut up. That way I can prove that I'm right. But if no one's listening, then we're just talking. Like it's like we're talking, but we're not talking to each other. We're not relating to each other. We're not understanding to each other. And I think especially in relationships, all kinds of relationships, that is such an essential thing to really understand where the person is coming from. And it's not just parroting back what the person said. It's not, it's really getting where that person's coming from. And that's harder to do, especially when your
Yes.
emotions are involved. Because if my emotions are involved and now I'm hyped at that moment, I don't care what's going on over there with you emotionally. I'm just committed to being right. And there's no way you're going to get through to me. And, maybe as I leave that conversation and I look back on it, maybe I'll see, like, oh, did I even know what that person said? But in the heat of the moment, no. But yeah, so I totally know what that's like, to have to reflect back. But on the flip side, when you do stop and you do take a moment, and I notice people will say sometimes when they're angry, they'll walk away and calm down, and then they'll come back, and then they'll have the conversation.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
like taking the temperature in the room and cooling it down. It's like cooling down the temperature, walking away, then breathing and then coming back, and then you can really hear each other. So yeah, so I totally get that. And I
Right.
get that in improv too, like you were
Mhm.
saying. You're right. You have to listen to your partner in improv, because if you don't, the scene won't work well, or the audience catches on, or it just breaks the flow when you're not paying attention to the other person. And it could be, and I want to say this to say that I think usually in conversations, no one means to be, in general conversations, no one means to be malicious or mean or deliberately ignore you. It's just what we do as human beings, and we're all guilty of it. So, it's
Yes, we
the,
are. We
yeah,
are. We are.
yeah,
But that's good, because I think you kind of planted the seed in people's minds here tonight that well, certainly there's an emotional aspect to listening. So people who are in relationships, for example, I'm hoping later will come on when we open the conversation, that they might be able to share some things in that realm, where you, like, how do you negotiate in a relationship that is ongoing, whether it be a marriage or a relationship between a superior at work, et cetera. So you can go in a lot of different directions. One place I want to take it is what we actually do here. I want to know if this ever affects you or anybody else in the audience in a meetup like this, is when we open the conversation up, right? This has happened to me several times here. And let's say the conversation is really good and you're really pumped up and you have something to contribute, but so do everybody else. So a lot of times you line up in the queue by putting an exclamation point, right? And then Shrikant or Joe, who's ever leading the conversation, says, okay, it's Evanique followed by Mike and Joe, right? So if I'm third in that queue, and don't forget, I'm coming in, I already have my contribution, but the subject matter is rich. Like, I don't have a name for this yet, but I feel it a lot at 52 Living Ideas. But anyhow, so now I'm one person away. So I'm on deck. I'm going next. But the person before me, let's say it's you say something that's so interesting. What you've done to me is, now this is a skill I think we need to work on, because I have my idea. I think it's valid enough. That's why I put exclamation in the chat. But now if I'm truly listening to you, what you're saying could influence what I'm going to say next. What I found sometimes myself doing is I almost block out the person right before me to make sure that I remember what it is that I'm going to say. Has that ever happened to you here? Did I describe that accurately?
that's why I was giggling at, yes.
Yeah.
Short answer, yes.
Right.
And it's especially when I first joined 52 Living Ideas, and you have this idea and you're like, it is awesome. And I know it's going to rock everybody's world. And then it's like, and then, you have these other people talking and you want to listen because that's what you're here to do.
Yes.
And
Yes.
then you're like, but I got to make sure I get this right. And sometimes what I'll do, because I was a debater in my former life, I'm now trying to make sure I can get everything out in the right way. What I've learned though is that you don't want to miss what the other person said, because the other person saying is so valuable. So what I do now is I write it down and then I highlight, like I put like a square around it. That way I can look down on it and get to it. So I write down what I know I want to say, and then I like put like a square around it in my notes, like
Yes.
Shrikant says, the pen and paper. And then I'm like, okay, I got it out of my head. I can go back, and sometimes I'll even write down the name of the person that said something that may have triggered it, or the idea or thought.
Mm-hmm.
And then I can give my attention to the person talking.
Yes.
Because I found that, especially early on in 52 Living Ideas, I was missing so much because I was just prompted on what I had to say. And, I was like, I want to make sure it comes out right. I don't want to be babbling. And then I'll write it down, and then I'm concentrating on that. And then I'm like, And then I hate to admit this, and I love every single person here. But sometimes I would go in my head, I wish this person would hurry up because I'm gonna lose my thought.
And how funny is that? And that's so normal. This
Yes.
has to happen outside. In any situation where you have people getting ready to speak, it could be a sales meeting or any group that's in order to speak, your mind could change. But I think it's a skill you can work on, though. I'm much better at it now than I was when I first joined. And I'm coming up on my 2nd year anniversary here. And I remember at the beginning, sometimes being terrified, first of all, just to talk, because I started to look at who was in the boxes. I go, wow, there's some really smart people here, and I'm going to start contributing to this conversation. But I got past that. But I do still at times have to force myself to listen carefully. And plus there's another thing, and this is physiological. It's my age, and it's also the time of night. Like, I'm on the East Coast in New York right now. I know we have somebody from New Zealand here tonight, so I'm not sure, Jane, what time it is where you are. But sometimes at night, as it pushes towards 11 o'clock p.m. here, I need to really keep an eye on my ability to listen, So I'll tell you where I would like to go next, Evanique, and then certainly you can take it anywhere you want after that. I want to talk about consequence of not listening, because I wrote in the introduction, and I had never done this before. I never really stopped and thought about what it's like for people outside of my field. What is it like for them when they listen? And what's the importance? What's the consequence of not listening? And then I made some real, very extreme examples, like the simplest with the most consequence is an air traffic controller and a pilot, right? So that information, some of it is not that difficult. I need to land the plane on which runway. It's B-17, Bravo. You don't want the pilot yelling back, B-17, bingo. You know what I mean? The pilot has to land the plane. So that information, even though it may not be a lot or highly technical, you don't want to get that wrong. So I would love tonight, if there's anybody in the audience here tonight, what are the consequences in your world when you don't listen? So obviously, if you're in a relationship and you're not listening, there will be a consequence. But so how about in your world, Evanique? If you're not listening at work, what are the consequences?
Well, as a paralegal, the consequences is that I could mess up a litigation for our company. Like, if I'm not listening or if I'm not paying attention. And listening is more than like listening to a person talk. It's also listening in terms of written communication. If I'm not clear as to what is going to go down, I could mess up a litigation. I could, miss a deadline for submitting a document that has a hard and fast deadline, like a court date or, a deposition or something like that. If I'm not paying attention, and that's a form of listening to the written communication. Or if I would say too, even verbally, like if I'm not listening to my coworkers when they tell me I've done this, or or they haven't done this, and I just quickly read, like it just results in like more time wasted, and it's not efficient. And for me, it's for me personally, because I like to pride myself on my work. So it's like, if I mess something up, I'm like, oh man, now I got to apologize to everybody. And then I feel guilty about it, because now I feel like what are the consequences? Like, how have I messed up other people? What I do matters to other people in the healthcare field. If I'm not getting that contract out, or I'm not listening to a deadline because I have 15 things, and I'm like, I'm just not paying attention to my deadlines. I mean, very real example is, I got dinged on my BPR for follow through. And it was because I would say to people, okay, I got it, but I wouldn't tell them when they were going to get it back. I wouldn't even ask them when they needed it by. And my manager was like, "You're doing a great job. And you need to realize that it's not just about you, that I could be messing up someone else's deadline and someone else's work.
Yeah.
I could be like losing pricing on a contract, these things like that. So in a very real world example, I could be jacking people up. This is no other way to say it.
Yeah, it's important.
And so focusing only on what I have to do is a form of not listening and not really catching. So now I had to work on improving that skill in written communication and oral communication. And picking that skill and saying to people, "Hey, when do you need this by?" Or, "Hey, I could get this to you next week. Is that acceptable?" And putting it on my calendar. That way I remember what I said. Because sometimes it's also listening to yourself. So I hope I answered that question.
Yeah, you answered it very well. Yeah, because those consequences are very real, especially losing a night's sleep. It sounds like you put your heart and soul into your work. So if you screw up because you're not listening, the carryover is more. Like you said, it affects other people in your life, but it also hurts you as well. You come home from work that day and your head hits the pillow. It's not the same. So yeah, I'd be very curious to what other people have to say about where consequence lies in their world in terms vis-a-vis listening. I had the most consequence listening in the 80s when I worked on the American Stock Exchange, as a lot of the people here know that I did that many moons ago, and that was huge consequence and very similar to the air traffic controller and the pilot. The transmission, the information that was being transmitted was not that technical. This was a hand signal, was up was buy, down was sell. But even without the hand signals, if I was on the phone as a clerk, somebody is saying to me, buy 1,000 shares of IBM at the market, and they tell me who it's for, and boom, I go. Now that's not really technical information, right? It's not that difficult. Am I buying or am I selling? I'm buying. What am I buying or how much? 1,000 shares of what? IBM, right? So that's not that hard if you think about it. And then they tell me who it's for. And maybe it was for Merrill Lynch. Okay, now I have an order in my hand. I wrote it down. I listened. I wrote it down. And then I might hand signal that order down to somebody, and they go out and trade, and we come back. Now, how can I mess that up? I mess it up the same way when we talked about having an argument with someone, because there was always a lot of tension there. I think you learn a lot about people's character when they make or lose money, right? Especially when they lose money. And if you're responsible for costing somebody money, a lot of times before I became a broker, I was a clerk, and I thought that job was harder, and I screwed up sometimes. Somebody would say buy, and I wrote down sell. And now, just like you with the paralegal work, you made a mistake that cost whatever it cost in your world. In my world, it cost somebody real money. And now they're on the phone again saying, how the F could you do that? And then I hang up the phone with that person, and I have a whole phone bank in front of me, right? So guess what I have to do? I have to click the next caller and start the conversation over again. And what happened to my listening? If I get rocked, and on the floor, it was a little bit different because there you were face to face in a crowd of people. And again, the consequences, was anybody going to live or die? No, but it was a lot of money if I screwed up. But I always found it fascinating how your surroundings affect the emotion, which affects the consequence. So it's sort of this kind of snowball effect. And the best brokers and clerks were not necessarily the smartest. What I found, it's the ones that really stayed the coolest on their feet. That improved their listening. They didn't get rattled.
What's so funny about that? I had a former boss who used to always say to me, this is when I worked in insurance and contracts. And this was like when I was really learning how to go deeper with contracts and negotiate better. And he used to always say to me, he was like, two things he used to always say to me. First of all, we're not doing brain surgery. It can always be fixed. It can always be corrected. That's number one.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, it's three things. Number one. Number two, you don't apologize. You make it right. he used to always say to me, he was like, Evanique, nobody cares about your apology. What they want to know is, what are you going to do to make it right? So he said, you can say, okay, he's like, I'm not saying don't apologize, but he was like, just don't stop there. So he was like, like I would like come down on myself so hard. And he would be like, stop groveling. Like,
Yeah,
seriously,
yeah,
like just apologize, say you're gonna fix it, and that's all you can do. Walk away and move on. And then I think the third thing that he would say, I think 2 and 3 were kind of combined, but he would say, and then just go and fix it. He was like, go and fix it, correct what you have to correct. Everybody makes mistakes. No one is perfect. Stop apologizing for being a human being. And what that did for me was it helped me move forward in a way that I could fix the problem and know and learn from the mistake, because I think mistakes are good if you can learn from them, if you can move
yes,
forward.
yeah,
And it helps you in the listening field, because if you can stop and apologize and say, okay, I messed up. Here's what I could do to fix it. Does this work going forward?
yeah,
And it's helped me so much and so far in my career. And it's why I can negotiate
V-
contracts now, because I'm like, at the end of the day, I know it can be fixed. I know it can be corrected. And it's not that I make a habit of making mistakes. I don't. But when I do, I kind of like I internalize it. And now I can't
yes,
listen to anybody because you're internalizing it. And that's
correct,
all you
correct.
hear is that voice in your head. So I totally get when you said, when you made that one mistake, now you're not listening, and now you got to pick up this other call,
Yeah, it snowballs.
and it
So
snowballs and it just messes up the day.
it does. Let's do the opposite now. You see the smile on my face is genuine. It's real, because what you did is you concluded that with like a happy ending to your story there, right? So the flip side of improvising, of trading on the exchange, where the listening consequences were so severe. Being a musician prior to that, there's a lot of joy if you're on a bandstand, regardless of the genre of music, and you're with musicians who are comfortable improvising, and some are not at all. I've been in situations with both, but when you're improvising on stage, listening is so crucial. But the joy comes from when a musician takes whatever it is that you're doing and makes an offer. They make the offer, just like improvisation comedians do. They make an offer to the other musicians, whether they're changing the feel of the music. If the really good ones can even think about key changes, etc. But then you get a look from somebody else in the band. I was a drummer, so I was always in the back. But occasionally, if I did something from the back that worked, let's say, then you might get the bass player or trumpet player turn around and kind of just look at you. And that little quick glance says, I heard you, and okay, I'm with you now, and we're gonna take this somewhere. But doesn't that also happen in conversations? Like I genuinely right now, I'm really enjoying myself talking with you. And when you do that, for me anyway, my ears just double in size. It makes it much, much easier to hear you, as opposed to if you're my boss and I effed up, like my ears start to shrink. I like the other side better.
No, I agree with you. I like the other side better too. And I think it's a flow. It's you know, Maritza always in her meetup, she talks about flow.
Yeah,
And I remember that it's just when you're listening to somebody, genuinely listening, and it's just a conversation that just flows and is at ease, and you can move in and out of topics, and like
right,
one topic
right.
will eventually go to another, in like this state of just like ease. And it just happens like at dinner, when you're at dinner with a group of people and you're just talking about one thing, and then it just gradually goes into something else. And then when you're gelling with a person and you're like conversating with a person, it's like that conversation could go on forever, and we would all be happy that that conversation happened, and you would pull something from it for yourself. And a lot of times it's just people sharing their experiences with certain things, and talking about it or asking questions. one of the things about effective listening is not just listening, it's just asking questions, making sure, you got it, or asking questions out of interest, wanting to know more about it.
Yeah,
So I think that's another aspect of listening that just comes naturally. Like
that's
you were
true.
saying, the person gave you a look and you're like, okay, all right, I got you. And then it
Yeah,
all
yeah,
flows together.
yeah, yeah.
You know who does that really well is Dave Matthews Band.
Oh, okay. All right. I
Yeah.
haven't seen them. I haven't seen them live, so I don't, I'm sure.
I,
Yeah, I'm sure they do.
I haven't seen them like live, but I've seen them like, when they tape live concerts and they do
Uh,
it all the time. It's
yeah,
like
yeah,
unedited. They're just flowing and then they just move into another song,
it's
another
great.
set.
Yeah,
And then all of a sudden they'll move it. You can tell the difference between their set and then all of a sudden when they're just freestyling, it's just like the body language changes, they're
right.
connecting with each other, and then all of a sudden they're just like feeling it, and then they're just moving.
It
And they're
changes
moving their
every, it changes
body.
everything.
Yeah,
Changes
like
everything.
it's great looking at
Yeah.
if you get a chance to do that.
You can. And we should probably conclude soon. But the what happens with me, I find with other improvisers, it used to happen with musicians, when you really like somebody, like you genuinely like them. Let's say you and I are going to be improvising together, or we're musicians, and I genuinely like you. So what happens is there's no agenda behind what it is that we're saying to each other, other than we want to share some information with each other, right? I have no other agenda than to do that. And when you like somebody and you have that feeling, then it's true. There's no such thing as a mistake on the bandstand or on the improvisation stage. When you're with people that you genuinely like this audience tonight, I don't know everybody here. There's a couple of people I don't know, but as you mentioned earlier, you know the vast majority of people here and you genuinely like them. So again, I think it's probably a good place to conclude that when you're in that situation with people, I think the ears get bigger. I don't know. I'll give you the closing word and then we can open up this conversation to our guests.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think when you're in a genuine conversation, you're right, your ears grow bigger. I think the challenge is, there's so many different types of conversations. And I know it's hard, but I think you can go into certain conversations like business or, personal, whatever, with a plan. But don't go in there with an agenda. Agenda has a different form. Like you're trying to, um, it just feels shady. I can't describe it exactly, but it kind of
I
just,
know what you mean. I definitely know
yeah,
what you mean.
like when
But
you go,
that's
yeah,
also important though. I mean, sometimes in the real world, you need to get something done and you need to put your side. But in terms of what makes us individually listen better, I think we're going to get a lot of different answers from the group tonight.
yeah. And you, like I
Yeah.
said, you can go in with a plan, but don't go in with an agenda. Like, I always feel like when somebody goes in with an agenda, they're trying to get something over on you. And even if you're trying to, like when you go in with a plan, your plan may be even in sales to sell your product or to offer a service, but not but and
Yeah.
and you can have a plan to do that, and you can still listen to the person, and you can figure out what needs there are, and you can see how your product can help this person achieve their plans. And I knew a lot of salespeople. I knew brokers when I was in insurance, and they said sometimes you have to say to the person, "We don't have what you need," and they said that has had the biggest impact on the person because when they needed one of our products or one of our services, mostly services, when they needed an insurance product or service, they knew who to call back on. They knew that broker that kind of said, yeah, they came in, they were going to sell us. And then when they listened to us, they figured out maybe we don't have what you need. And then, but when they did, they were the first person that they called. So that's
Nice.
what I mean. Like go in with a plan, but not an agenda to get over on somebody.
Yeah, very nice. Evanique, I can't thank you enough for talking with me. Thank you. I really, really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun. Thank you. Joe, so we can open it up. If I don't know how you want to handle this per se, if anybody has any general comments about where the conversation was and where it could go. If not, I have some prompting questions, but I would be curious to see, without a prompt, what the audience has in general, what their thoughts are, either about the conversation or your own thoughts about listening.
Sure, yes, absolutely. So folks, go ahead right now. You can type exclamation point in the chat or raise your hand in Zoom and share what you've taken away from this conversation between Evanique and Mike. First up, we have Andrea.
Joe, can they unmute?
And oh, yeah, no, actually, that's a good point. But let me just change that really quickly. Should be good. Okay.
You're not listening, Joe.
I know I wasn't.
Sorry, that was like so perfect. I had three things to say. I love the discussion. One little hack, because I like the idea of hacks, Mike. That was cool. So one little hack, and I'm interested in feedback about this, but one little hack that I tried back in the years when I was working as a trainer, I'm still kind of using, is instead of asking people if they were understanding what I said, I will say, am I explaining myself okay? And the reason why I did that, and like I'm not like gloating about how wonderful it is, but it puts the onus on me. Did I explain okay? As opposed to, do you understand it? If you don't, you're an idiot. So that one, that actually seems to have worked well for me. The second thing is multitasking. I am really unable to multitask. And when I was in the work situation before, not so much where I am working now, but we all do it online. We all do it on Zoom. I used to work with this guy that he would be talking to you, and while he was talking to you, he would be typing, and he was obviously doing something else. And I just really wanted to say to him, I don't even need to be talking to you because you're not paying attention. And I find that like remarkably frustrating. I don't know how you deal with it, because I know that there are people that do need to multitask, and sometimes what they're doing is they're writing down what you're saying so that they can have a response. But because he wasn't looking at me, I just found it so frustrating. So I'm interested in what other people think about multitasking. And then the third thing is, this is not so much a listening thing, but interacting via email or text involves a whole other set of assumptions in terms of listening. So I spend very little time on my phone. I only check email and text like once or twice a day, because usually I'm in a Zoom meeting. And I have found that other people who are, especially people who are younger, they find it really irritating that I don't text them back in the time frame that they expect. So I had a disagreement with someone a couple of weeks ago where, they sent me a text at like 9 o'clock in the morning. And because I didn't respond until 1 o'clock in the afternoon because I was in an auto accident, they sent me multiple email messages or multiple texts. The first one was, would you like to get together for lunch? And then the last one was basically, you bitch. And I thought, now, this particular situation has some other aspects to it, but, I've had conversations with people who said, yeah, it's perfectly fine that I don't respond for 5 hours to the email that you sent. But if you don't respond within a half an hour to the email that I sent, I'm going to be angry with you. And that's really difficult. The other thing is that, technology has enabled us to completely ghost somebody, which is amazingly hurtful. And, that's just like a feature of communication that wasn't even available before. So I'm not even certain how to deal with that, but God, it's painful when it happens. And I think a lot of it is just that our expectations in terms of how many other people someone is dealing with, or, like if you know someone well, and you don't hear from them, you might worry about them and think, oh, are they okay? But, depending upon, I don't know, whatever else goes on in your head, our tolerance for people taking a while to get back to you, like particularly via electronic communication, is so minimal. And I find that's really, really different for me because I'm single and I don't have kids and I'm not always texting. Versus like this woman that I used to work with who was on her phone all the time and would cancel meetings in the middle of the day because her son was breaking up with his girlfriend, which just boggled my mind. So, like
Yeah.
the whole way we communicated is just, it's so different. And the whole working online thing, really challenging, I think, for me as an older person, but also to be really honest, as somebody that doesn't have tons of people that they interact with. So I'm not always on my phone. I'm not always in email. And people who are always on their phone are in email, extremely unforgiving, which is really, really difficult. And I don't really know exactly how to deal with that. And I think that's different for introverts and extroverts as well. So I'm done.
Thank you, Andrea. Mike or Evanique, would you like to, comment on anything that Andrea had shared?
Yeah, I do. Evanique, if you have something, you can go first. Feel free.
Sure. So, with Andrea, I was thinking of that. Like, first of all, one of the things is we were talking about technology. I just want to talk about that in general a little bit, and that's the reason why people multitask. And I always feel like it's impossible to multitask. Usually I'll have to tell somebody, hey, hold on for a second, I just got this email in. Or I'll tell them, hey, I'm typing, but like, especially if I'm on speakerphone, they can hear me typing. And I'm like, I'm typing this down, in an email. That way I can clean it up and send it to you. That way depending on what the conversation is. The point is that for me to multitask, to do 2 or 3 different things while listening to you, what suffers always for me is the listening. And in technology, you're right, you expect this quick response. And I know for me, like, it's that instant gratification, it's the ding, it's the all those different things, right? But you don't count for the simple fact that people have lives. And and you're right, like, people will just get upset that you're not responding right away. And it's like, yes, because I have a life, I have things that I'm doing. I make it a point where, unless, like, on a personal note, like if I'm at work, unless it's like, unless I don't respond right away if I'm working on something, because then I get distracted too. So I have to like create boundaries for myself when it comes to technology, and that if I'm like working on something, I will do that. Like, sometimes I'll even leave my phone in my room and go and do other things around the apartment. That way I know I won't get distracted. Because once that happens, I'm derailed. I'm taken this call, and now I haven't gotten anything I said I would do for the day. So I think technology, you have to really, my thought is, create boundaries around that technology. And you can only decide what's good for you.
And Mike?
Yeah, I'll just add, I like the hack that you started with. Am I explaining myself okay? Because I think it depends on your career, what you're doing. You said you were a trainer. Were you a physical trainer, or what kind of training were you doing, if you don't mind me asking?
I taught software classes. And so
Okay,
like,
perfect. Yeah, perfect.
I would always say, am I explaining okay? As opposed to, God, Mike, you dummy, did you get it?
Right. No, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Right.
Yeah, thank you. No,
The onus
I'm
should be on
making,
me, not on you, because
Right.
I'm the trainer.
Yep. No, thank you. I'm just making a little list of these little hacks and ideas. So if anybody else here has something like that, that's perfect. Yeah, that's it, Joe. Thank you. That was great.
Okay. Next up, we have Polly, followed by Cheryl, then Becky.
Mike and Evanique, that was wonderful. So thank you very much. I have a few things to say that, one about listening. It's such a basic skill that we develop from birth. Yeah, I mean, if you look at babies, first they're listening to their own voices, but then they're listening to their mother or their parent, and they just look. If you look at little babies, they're just looking at the person who's talking in awe, and they're just, taking in the sounds, the cadence, making sense of language. And as they get older, then, and this has happened to all of us, we start following simple directions, and then start forming our own stories in our head and start having conversations. Then those conversations from simple, what is this, to why and how. And then we start having more complex conversations with nuances. So I just think that listening is so basic to all of us, and yet, we don't do it quite as well as we should. So that's one thing I wanted to say. Another thing was about when listening, are we reacting or are we responding? And I feel there's a difference in reaction is sometimes knee-jerk, just a response. The reactions could be based on our own assumptions that we may have, or prejudice that we may harbor, and that responding is actually taking in what the other person is saying and then using that context to converse. So I thought that was another thing that came to my mind. So talking about responding using the speaker's input is more an active form of listening. And I work with children, so I tend to go back to that age group. But for children to learn to listen, we do a lot of call and response games, whether they are activities or games, simple directions, one step directions to multi-step directions. So they are games that children play in the classroom. Even to learn grammar, they would play these games because then they see also that if you change a word, the sentence structure changes, and the meaning of the word of the sentence changes. The other thing is, if you close your eyes, now you're taking away one sensory input, and with children, will often have them use a blindfold, and one child gives directions and the other child listens to those directions to complete a task, whether it is picking up an object from a table or whatever, and they'll say, move forward 3 steps, go right, but they have to actively listen and process. So by turning off one sense, you can activate, you can really kind of tune into your listening. So sometimes when I listen, I usually will close my eyes so that I don't have those distractions. And another way to engage people is, we do this a lot. I see many teachers in my school doing this, is to engage the children. Like Evanique first said, her coworker stopped talking. You've just eliminated the sound. And so then you pay attention. Hey, something changed over here. Creating some kind of an engaging hook, or the teachers will often have children talk about the topic. So to get them, to get their juices flowing so that they are now activated to listen. Oh, did you know? Did you not know? Here is something. Have you noticed? So kind of drawing the listeners' attention to you. And sometimes they'll vary their tone or change the tempo, or they'll add some movement to keep the listener engaged. So those are some of the things that I found very helpful. And then I think last, I want to talk about the consequences of not listening. It really depends on the relationship. Sometimes we take some relationships for granted, and I think that can be terrible because you think you're listening, but to the speaker, it seems like you're ignoring them because there's no response. And so consequences of not listening or not paying attention or not being present in that moment, I think can be detrimental to any relationship. So those are my few thoughts. Thank you so much. I thoroughly enjoyed your presentation.
That was
There's
great.
a lot to
Rupali.
comment. Yeah.
Yeah,
that
there was
fantastic.
so much there. I'll just comment first, Rupali, because I know what you do. I know that you work with kids, and I work with them too. I just want to ask you a question, if you don't mind coming back on briefly. Every time you tell a story about what you're doing in the classroom, there always seems to be an element of play involved. Like even if you're teaching them something, like I would want to be a student in your classroom based on the way you tell these stories. So I think it kind of connects to what we were saying earlier, that if you really like someone and you have that joy of interaction, of playful interaction with people, I think, again, like my ears get bigger. So I'm just curious to what you think about creating a setting for children in particular that has that element of play. And then should we as adults carry that over to our lives now? Do you have any general thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think one thing that I notice with children is they just live in the moment, and they're not really, carrying baggage of other parts of their personality with them. They are in the moment truly, and children don't think like adults. They are out there every day, eager and excited. Whereas adults, sometimes I think we moan and groan of our,
Yeah.
whatever we're doing. And I teach in a Montessori school, at a Montessori school, and the Montessori environment is very carefully prepared. So it's very clean, clutter-free. It's purposeful. Every element, every object in the classroom is well thought out by the teacher. It's a piece of beauty. So there's a living plant, and there are animals. There's everything is color coded. So there's color. There's living things, and so there's a lot of enriching items in the environment. And I think if we should learn something from children, I think it is that looking at life every day with eager eyes and enthusiasm, and not that, oh, I know this from before, like I've seen this 100 times. And prepare the environment. I truly feel that preparing the environment is key, because then you have so many wonderful things to talk about. I don't know if that makes.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, it was very, very good. Very good.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank you so much,
Rupali, do you see that you're being requested in the chat for a possible interviewee here?
No, I didn't see the chat. Okay, let me take a look.
Somebody, Eleanor, suggested that we should have the interview with Rupali next time, and you got a hearty agree from Evanique.
Sure.
Well, thank you. I feel honored. I feel very honored. Thank you very much.
Of course.
So we have Cheryl, Becky, followed by Eleonora, then Jane, then Laura. Cheryl.
Well, I'm suffering from the phenomenon of what I was going to say originally. I don't even remember anymore, because I've been so caught up in everything that everybody has said. And this is going to be an exercise in memory, because I did not do what Evangelique did. I should have taken notes, but I didn't. I was a teacher too. I taught in college. I was a writing program administrator, and I used to teach first year writing. and teach people how to teach first year writing. And one of the things that I would research was, how to, and one of the things we're telling our students is pay attention to your audience. What became very apparent to me quickly is most of us as teachers do not pay attention to our audience. We walk in thinking we have all the answers. We don't even, and the only way I could be an effective teacher is I had to find out about my students. So I had to find a way to invite them to talk to me so I could listen. So I would ask them to do autobiographical essays. There was no point. They weren't going to get graded on it. Just tell me who you are. I'd make up surveys. And one of the things that A2 was talking about in terms of, am I explaining this well? Somebody introduced me to something I thought was brilliant called the minute paper. And you would stop every once in a while and say, what did you just hear me say?
Mm.
And they'd write for a minute or two and hand it in. And then you found out ways you were not communicating, ways it wasn't getting across. And I always found that when my students realized I was listening to them and what they said to me mattered, they were more willing to listen to me. I've actually remembered now my original comment. I'm part of a Zoom group. It's been a weekly group. We've been meeting for 3 years, and it started off called Crafting Difficult Conversations. And it was all about this kind of conversation, listening. How do you listen? What was so frustrating to me is the facilitator of the group, really nice guy, couple of guys, they never asked us who we were.
Mm.
I mean, okay, sort of mansplaining. They came in telling us how to listen. And they spent all their time telling us how to listen. And it took me weeks, a couple of months to finally start nudging them, because I didn't want, they're good guys. They mean well. I don't want to hurt their feelings, but come on. How do you teach someone to listen who's lecturing you about listening? Okay, I'm going to stop there.
Yeah, thank you, Cheryl.
Yeah,
No,
Evanique,
I like the that whole connection idea again. I wrote down as you were talking, Cheryl, and I don't remember where I heard this about children. It's not just a friendly face, but as they start getting older, I'm talking middle school into high school, it's a friendly ear in their classroom, not just a friendly face. And I don't remember who turned me on to that idea, that the older the kid gets, it's not just the friendly face, but they need the friendly ear as well. I thought that connected to what you said very well. Yeah, thank you, Cheryl. That was very good.
Yeah, Cheryl, I just wanted to add one thing really quick. I think, even when you made the assignment, like write down what I said, or, write down what I'm saying, your kids know you cared. And I think that's the main thing, like the main thing for a teacher is that, the kids know you care. And when the kids know you care, you're right, they will listen. They will
But
listen to
I
you.
think the interesting point there is I didn't say that. I said, write down what you heard.
Right.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, sorry, I did not catch that. But thank you for calling me out on that. But I mean,
So
the
now-
point is, what?
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, but I think the point is like, even when you told them to write down what they heard, they know you cared enough to even ask that question. Because, not every teacher does that. So that's just very special.
Okay, now I have to give you one more. We were required to give a final exam, which is stupid in a writing class. There's no comprehensive. So what I did is I always asked them a question that I cared about. When I was getting ready to teach online classes, I said, tell me what your concern is about teaching an online class. That was their final exam.
Thank you, Cheryl. So next up, we have Becky, followed by Eleonora.
Yeah, thank you so much for that presentation. And I think that sharing through your stories really made it relatable. So what I think I was hearing a lot was the importance is not just listening, but mutual active listening. And so that's really a conversation, because there are situations that were described about, one party listening, but, if that just keeps continuing, um, that can also get frustrating on the part of the listener. And because what's not being reciprocated is the speaker taking his or her turn to listen. And so, so what is it that makes listening so important? It's that both the speaker and the listener, they get to take turns, and that's where the connection happens. And going to Evanique's story about how she had listened and she would get things out and done, but didn't communicate about the timeline, that there was a bit of a disconnect. And so so that was a great example. So and very relatable. So the to really complete the whole listening process, it would be also your taking your turn to go from listener to speaker.
Thank you, Becky.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Go ahead,
Sure.
Evanique.
Yeah, I wanted to thank Becky for that. And also she brought up a good point about, um, giving feedback, or, the listener not just talking, because the listener wants the feedback. The listener wants to hear what you're thinking and what you're saying. And it is a very key part of listening, is being able to communicate to the other person that you are hearing them. Because otherwise, like, how people start talking and you could tell when a person has just tuned you out, and so they just let you keep talking. That's not a good feeling either. And it's key, like both is key. So thank you, Becky, for bringing that up.
Yeah, one of
Thank
the
you.
questions, Joe, that I was going to ask, but I'm not going to ask it because we have plenty of input already. But it's the idea of, like, I've spent so much time talking to you, Joe, for example, over the last couple of years, and now Becky as well. Like, the three of us end up spending a lot of time talking, that I think it's very similar, I think, to musicians who end up playing with each other often, that you begin to learn the nuances of how people have conversations. So when Becky was talking, it's like I'm so used to trying to get information from her or from you and how to keep a conversation going. I wanted to add that when you have a regular conversation partner, it almost like it gives you a chance to spar or to train that listening ear. So yeah, thank you, Becky.
Yes, thank you, Becky. So next up, we have Eleanor.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Yeah, multitasking was never actually my thing. And I was always wondering how people do multitasking. I think I'm almost guessing if somebody is multitasking, she doesn't take it seriously, kind of like, oh, I cannot really focus on one thing proper. So I'm not a great fan of people multitasking when they do something for me personally. But I figured out I can multitask if I work on protocol, like a machine. Basically, if I have my actions set up and I'm just pushing through the buttons, and then I can multitask for sure. somebody mentioned ghosting, and yes, this is a serious thing, online ghosting. I encountered ghosting probably actually always. And the first 5 years in my self-employment, I found it terrible because my clients would disappear just after I deliver my jobs, and they would never come back for 3 weeks and don't even tell thank you to me. And I would say, oh my God, I fucked it up so badly. I must be so bad. And then all of a sudden, somebody would call back in 2 months and say, oh, do you want to work again? And first time I thought, oh, maybe the other person was even worse than me. Maybe they tried to swap me for somebody, tried someone, and the person was also not good, and now they're returning back. No, actually, this is the thing today. You know, people leave you, depart. I call it they depart into the universe, and then they land on you like aliens, you know, again. So it's kind of funny. Yeah, I have it a lot too, so it's quite normal in our society, probably. And I found it amazing that Becky said mutual active listening. I like it. Yeah. And then I really appreciate Evangelique, because she's so soft-spoken, and I like listening to her always. Thank you.
Thank you, Eleanor. Mike or Evanique, do you have any quick responses? If not, we'll just go right to Jane.
Yeah, we've heard the word multitasking several times tonight. I've just made note of that it definitely, I think pretty much everybody's in agreement. It doesn't help your listening, for sure. Right. Eleanor brought that up too. Yeah, thank you, Eleanor.
So next we have Jane, followed by Laura.
Hi, everybody. Just to answer Mike's sort of question, it's about the middle of the afternoon here in New Zealand, but to blow your mind, it's actually Thursday. I'm reminded of a saying by an ancient Greek Stoic called Epictetus, who once said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." And I tried to keep that in mind because I could just talk the hind legs off a donkey. I've got a story for you about how important it is to listen. And by the way, I should preface this by telling you that this is a story that shows me in very high regard, but I've got plenty of stories that do the exact opposite. So I'm not trying to blow my own trumpet here. Years ago, I was working as a psychiatric nurse, and I was doing night duty and sitting with patients in a common area, watching TV and so on. And gradually patients were heading off to bed. And one of them was about to leave the room, and he just turned to everybody and said goodbye, and off he went. And an alarm bell went off inside my head, and I kept a bit of an eye on this guy. And then once he got into bed, I left it about 10 minutes and went down to check on him. And thank goodness I did, because he had actually taken an overdose. And what alerted me to this was that he didn't say goodnight, he said goodbye. And that's odd. But fortunately, we caught it early enough. He looked like he was sleeping, but not quite. There was something a bit odd about his sleep as well. And so, yeah, we gave him treatment, of course, and he didn't die. My last comment is that is a question again about what do you do when you're aware that somebody that you're talking to is not actually listening. And I find this particularly difficult. A lot of my friends live overseas, and I ring them up and chat, and then suddenly somebody will get up and start cooking or something, and I can hear pots and pans, and I just feel that I'm not being heard. And I find that very difficult, and I don't really know how to cope with it. Because, you know, I don't want to upset friends, because if you say something, invariably they'll say, oh no, I can concentrate on two things. But it certainly feels to me that no, they can't really. So if anybody's got any clues as to how to cope with that and not upset people, that would be great. And thank you very much.
That was great, Jane.
Yes, thank you, Jane. Mike or Evanique, do you have any immediate responses, or?
Yeah, go ahead, Evanique. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think the response is something Rupali said, is to get them to focus, is to ask questions. I should have written this down. When she was talking, she said, you know, or like things like, do you remember that? Or did you notice this? Or, you know, cues to make sure that they're hearing and they're listening. You know, did you notice when I said this? You know, like, what did you think about that? Or ask them questions. Like if they are cooking or doing something and you know they're distracted and you feel like they're not getting your attention, ask them questions. Be like, hey, you know, I've been talking for a while. What do you think I should do? Or, you know, or ask them, you know, like, did you hear what I said? Especially if you don't think so. I think and I don't know your friend, so I can't say this like for certain, but I think if you ask it in such a way that, you know, engages them back in the conversation, that could be helpful.
Very good. Thank you very much. Yes,
Yeah.
I'll try.
Jane, I would love to, I wish we had more time for another meetup, because I would love to discuss with you and others what it is exactly in the wiring of your brain or your intellect or your heart or soul which caught the moment that your patient was in trouble. So, you know, is there a blend between your intelligence, your experience, and emotional intelligence? But I would love to hear, well, we don't have time to do it now, but it's something I put down when you started to talk. What exactly is it that makes you catch that moment and proceed the way you did? It's probably a combination of things, but I'd love to have that conversation another time.
Yeah, that would be that I found that to be interesting as well, Mike. And I think it's really the key moment was like, instead of good night, goodbye, and that's focusing on the words. That was actually really, that was remarkable. Beautiful story. So next up, I believe we have Laura. Laura, you need to unmute.
Yeah, we're right on time, Joe.
Just about, yeah.
Yeah, very good.
Laura? Okay, if not, then we'll go to Tina first, then Becky. Go ahead, Tina.
All right, I'm just going to turn on my camera. Sorry I missed the first part, but I just wanted to respond to a lot of people's commentary. I think it's been really wonderful and enriching to hear what people have to say about how they perceive listening. You know, I like Becky's response, and it made me think about how people can use listening as a power play. Like, well, you're listening to me, so I'm empowered, but I'm not going to listen to you just to disempower you, you know? But then, and then when in Jane's commentary, I do know that some people they look like they're not paying attention, but a lot of times when people do mundane tasks as they're listening, they actually are listening. They're listening, they're processing. You might not see their eye contact, but I do know that more and more people are having difficulties with eye contact. You know, maybe it's because of the lockdown and COVID, maybe because a lot of people are seeing themselves or are developing some mildly autistic properties of which can lead to the lack of eye contact. So, I would say that maybe somebody isn't, even if they don't have eye contact, it doesn't mean that they're not hearing, but
Mhm.
you do have to test them out. Like I do this with my son all the time. He's 14. He's in the room. He just heard me. And and he's like, focused on something else right now. But when I brought him up, he looked my way and gave me a certain look. But so especially guys, I mean, I know that there are differences of how people process information, and their different sensory input. I really liked Michael Gurian's work in terms of the differences between men and women, the male brain and the female brain. And even though some men can have a little bit more female-like brains and some women can have more male-like brains, there's enough of a divide. And I think he uses PET scans or SPECT scans for that. So, but anyway, I think in reading his work, I'm a little bit more patient of what I might consider not listening, but it actually is listening, and just a little bit more awareness, because also the length of discourse or the sentence length that people use can also affect people's listening. So like Tulsi Gabbard, who's from Hawaii, and she was a presidential candidate. If you listen to her discourse, her story arcs, her ideas span a number of sentences. She's not a sound bitey type of person. And it might be to her downfall, because a lot of people like sound bites because they're not listening to everything. But she is very intelligent. She can incorporate a lot of information, and so you have a very thick and dense speech that she can put together on the spot.
Mm-hmm.
But people do have different types of things that they like to listen to. So if somebody likes short sentences and quick ideas, then sometimes the best thing to do is to come up with that. And it's not always that easy. But anyway, so I just thought I'd bring that up. Thank you.
Thank you, Tina. So I see Laura is actually hit exclamation point again. Laura, can you unmute? Okay, we'll go to Becky.
I was very engrossed in Jane's sharing, and so it made me think, like, sometimes listening is I mean, the most obvious way of listening, because people like to talk, is verbal listening, but it's really about receptivity, and we speak through our body language as well, and as well as through our tones and so much more. So when she was talking about her patient, it made me think, like, well, how do I tell when things are off? And it would be measuring the baseline. And oftentimes people mask what they say, but it's hard to always mask the less conscious parts that come out through tics or other nonverbal cues. And so that was a very interesting share, Jane. Thank you so much for that. And I recently completed a suicide prevention course. So, so trying to listen for things really requires seeing the before and after, because certain people can communicate the same content, but it's really seeing that change in the behavior that is the trigger for me. So
Thank you so much for that.
Joe, in the interest of time, I won't comment on both Tina, Becky, and the other ones, but I just say briefly that everybody here has really hit the mark in terms of what Evanique and I wanted to accomplish tonight. So thank you all so much for your comments. I think there's Laura still, right, Joe?
Yes, Laura, can you unmute?
Had it and it left. It always
Okay. Well,
she gets bounced when she turns her audio on.
Anyway, okay. So we'll now stop the recording and actually do some improv exercises. And so I just wanted to do Mike or Evanique, do you have any last comments? I thought it was a great, great conversation. And so.
Yeah,
okay.
what you did is like you gave us a chance to do 4 or 5 future meetups if we wanted to, based on where you took the conversation, which is exactly what we wanted. So Evanique, I don't know what you want to add. Please go right ahead. But I thoroughly enjoyed myself tonight with all of you. Thank you.
I did as well, and I want to thank everybody for their contributions tonight. I thought they were all excellent, and I think you're right, Mike. Like there's like 4 or 5 meetups you can get from tonight's meetup, and to the newcomers, Cheryl, Jane, thank you so much for what you contributed tonight. Really great. So thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead, Laura.
I have a thing that when I'm having a conversation, let's say, be it with my daughter, sometimes when she talks, I feel that I know what she's going to say. I have the words out of my mouth before she gets there. And I tend to do a terrible thing, which is to break into her conversation to sort of push it ahead. And she gets really infuriated, and she should, because it's terrible that I do that. But I oftentimes know what people are going to say before they say it, for whatever reason. It's some topic I know and I've talked, I don't know. It's eerie. And I think I need to know how to break that in listening to people speak. And it's important for me to do listening because I can't write notes. I can't type. The only way I can do anything in communicating is verbally. And I have to be able to retain it because I cannot write it down. And I need perhaps some ways in which I can learn to take in verbal communication and possibly write something down quickly, maybe in the form of dual tasking, which is difficult, like I said. So is there some way I can tag things that I want to be able to remember, some keyword or something that may help me, or at some point in a conversation, I can put something down because I have processing information too. So I have to move quickly. So how do you do all that and read a conversation at the same time and in listening? I mean, because I have to do other actions other than just listen, which I'm not so good. Maybe this is much for this late hour.
So yeah, maybe actually we're running a little bit behind on time, and I think that's a very complex question. Essentially, how do you remove your bias? And that's actually could be a follow-up. Does anybody have a really quick response for Laura?
I do. Laura, especially with your daughter, just think about it as if you don't have to complete her sentence. Just maybe she just needs to verbalize it. And think of it that way. When you're thinking, oh, I know what she's going to say, you may know what she's going to say, but also think that she just needs to verbalize it. She just needs to communicate it for herself. And maybe that'll stop you from interrupting her and just letting her get it out.
Yeah, I can understand that case when it's
Thank you.
things,
Thank
but
you, Evanique.
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna have to stop. We're gonna have to stop it there because we're running a little bit behind now. So, but thank you for the question. Mike, do you want to say something about it?
Yeah, sure. We can start. The recording is off?
No. I
Oh,
thought.
yeah,
Do
we've wrapped up plenty. Yeah, no, this was fantastic.
Yeah, apologies for cutting you short there, Laura. But it's we're just running a little bit today.
Yeah, we're running
so,
late.
I apologize
So-
for
No,
confidence.
no,
No
not at
worry,
all.
no worries. Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording now.